Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, a show about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 learners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My mission is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, is doing during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how learners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple crises: the global pandemic, Brexit, and of course, the ongoing and accelerating collapsing of capitalism, the state, and the climate through this decade. To do this, I need people like you, dear listener. Most of all, I need people who are in Leeds or who are from Leeds to come on this show and be my guests. So please join me and help me with this mission whenever and however you can. Critically, I will need people like you, dear listener, as financial backers. Please consider supporting or donating to this project. You can do so with a £1 monthly donation via either Patreon or Ko-fi, or you could donate any one-off amount to Working Hours via either Ko-fi or through the LibrePay button on the About page of Western Studios website. Thank you. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. What did you want to be when you grew up?
I always wanted to be a writer when I grew up. When I was a kid, I was always writing stories, trying to write novels. I used to write plays that I would then record and act out on cassette tape.
Nice.
I actually just forgot that I used to do that until you asked me that question. But yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And I always read a lot and I always wrote a lot. But it wasn't really until much later, when I was in sort of approaching the age of 30, that I really started to take it seriously as an option for work myself. But yeah, you go through these phases as a child of wanting to do different things. It was suggested to me at one point that I train as a teacher. It wasn't something that I was really up for. I went to school in a comprehensive school in Wakefield during the 80s, which was the 80s and early 90s, the Thatcher era. And I just remember how harassed the teachers were, water coming through the ceiling in some of the classrooms. And I just, remember thinking, this is not for me. I don't want to be a teacher and have to, because the teachers in our school worked so hard. Not that I don't work hard, but just I think you have to be really devoted to it if you want to do it.
There's so many moving parts to it. You're not just going in and you're working in maybe a shoddy office building and then dealing with other things. It's like you also are in a care position where you're sort of guardianing people and you have to look after them and you have to be interested in their well-being. It's like there's so much more to it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There's
loads to it, and I think teachers now the burden on them increases all the time, and the amount of stuff that teachers now have to do is so much greater than they had to do at one point. I used to work in a special school at one point, and I remember one of the teachers she was approaching retirement, and she was telling me when she first started teaching, they used to literally play badminton in their lunch hour because they had a break. There's no way teachers now can do that. The amount of responsibility that they have to safeguarding and pastoral care, and I think they do a lot around making sure children, increasingly making sure they're fed and clothed. So they have a lot of responsibility. Teachers, I've got enormous admiration for them. It's not something I could do myself.
Yeah. But we won't get lost down that rabbit hole. So I will.
Good idea.
I'll so yeah, because I will go off on various tangents, and which is all well and good, but I want to kind of keep this focused with the work stuff. I'm quite happy to go off on various tangents, but now I'll generally try and bring it back.
Yeah.
Because you can really get lost in those conversations.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, let's try and stay focused.
So, but there's always plenty of space for doing that as well. You're listening to Series 3, Episode 38, and to my guest, S.J. Bradley. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 18th of November 2022. Hello, loves. So now that the temperature has dropped and become winter, and also because it comes up in this episode, I'm going to signpost Leeds Warm Spaces. Go to leeds.gov.uk/campaign/warm-spaces to find out all about the scheme to try to keep you warm in winter. Well, maybe not you, or maybe. Anyway, if you didn't know about it, you do now. S.J. Bradley is an author, short story writer, and creative writing tutor. She has taught short story writing for Comma Press and for First Story charity in Leeds and Bradford, and recently graduated a PGCert from Cambridge University Institute of Continuing Education, which she attended with a bursary from First Story. SJ has been working part-time in jobs in the third sector or local communities, and working part-time has allowed her to continue doing creative work. Most of her jobs have involved working directly with people to improve their emotional well-being and mental health. During the pandemic, SJ changed jobs several times due to a combination of bad luck and at one point being made redundant. Some of this was due in part to decisions made not to commute long distances to work anymore, and to only ever look for work that was either remote or based in Leeds. To find out more about S.J. Bradley's work as an author, go to sjbradleybooks.com. Now then, let's get on with this episode of Working Hours with S.J. Bradley. What are you doing now?
I'm an author, so I write novels and short stories. My most recent novel came out in 2017, so I haven't had a big work published in a few years. I think it's always been hard to make a living as an author, and I think the landscape increasingly is getting tougher, particularly if you write anything that's a bit weird or non-commercial, which I tend to do. I've had years where it's been really good, and I've done a lot of teaching work, and I've been able to make nearly make a living doing that, and that's been really good. But it is quite hard to make a consistent living purely just from writing. So I also I've always had a day job as well, but in the past I've done lots of different things. I worked for a while on a community development project. For a long time, I worked in special schools with children with special needs, which was a job I absolutely loved. And what else have I done? No, those are the big ones, really. A lot of the work I've done has been community level, so it's been working with children with special needs, or working with people in the local community to improve their mental and physical health.
Okay, so the next question's normally how did you get into it? But yeah, so I suppose, because you mentioned a few things there, so
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're kind of balancing some of those of like one thing's complementing the other and they lead into one another. So what was your kind of journey into that? In the first instance, I guess I'm like, how you got into writing and being able to get to a point where you're getting published and actually being able to get some money back from it.
Yeah.
And then I suppose the kind of, the parallel career of like how that went as well.
Yeah. So I suppose I have you probably would call it a bit of a portfolio career where you do lots of different things. But I primarily see my most important work as being the creative work, and the other work that I do to earn a living kind of supports that. So the way that I got into being an author, there's no one route in, I would say. When I teach, people often ask me, how do you become an author? But there isn't just, the frustrating answer is there isn't just one way to do it. People often think you have to go to uni and you have to do a creative writing MA. I always tell people that is not true. You don't have to do that. Creative writing MAs are like any MA, they can be quite expensive. It doesn't necessarily lead you to becoming an author afterwards. Because the publishing world is a really odd one. And what I see often is really, really talented authors writing great books who don't make a lot of money. It's not a way that you can rely on to make a living. So as I sort of came it wasn't something that I started to take seriously until I sort of started approaching the age of 30. And I thought, I had this thought that kept coming back about what I wanted to do. And I'd had some really interesting experiences in my day job at the time. I was working in a hospital for adults with severe and long-term mental health difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
I had a really, really interesting job. And I thought, well, it would be really interesting to write a novel about this, about some of the things that happened and what an odd environment it was. And I started to think, well, if I want to write this, I need to seriously take some time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a kind of person, there are authors out there who work full-time at a day job and write in the evenings and at weekends.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I've always found it really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I can write better if I have dedicated time to do it.
Mm.
So rather than pursuing, a more well-paid career, I decided, well, what I want to do is I really want to find a way that I can write.
Mm.
So I sort of manoeuvred myself into the position where I had, I wasn't working a completely full-time working week and I had some time to write. And the way that I started out was by writing short stories. And I had a few short stories published after a lot of rejection. I think it's important to say that my first attempts weren't published. I wrote a lot of not very good short stories early on that nothing happened to them before I started to produce anything that was a bit better. I had some short stories published, and eventually what happened was I had a story in an anthology called LS13, which was published by a local publishing house called Valley Press. And the editors of that book were Wes Brown and I think Nathan Connolly was an editor in that as well. And Nathan read my story that was in the book and got in touch with me and said, have you got anything bigger? A novel. And I did, and I'd been working on this novel for ages, which I'd been trying to get published and nobody had been interested in it. And Nathan said, send me your novel. And I sent it to him and I just kind of thought, oh, well, nothing will happen about this. Because I'd sent it to so many places and had some huge disappointments. And then he came back and said, oh, I love it. I'd love to publish it. And he still runs Dead Ink Books, who are based in Liverpool. They're an independent press. Until then, they had been an ebook publisher, but they were moving into publishing physical books. And he said, oh, this is going to be our first physical book that we're going to publish. And that was really, really
nice.
Hugely, hugely exciting. Because if he'd said it's just going to be an ebook, because I was so keen for it to be a physical book, I might even have said no. So even though I was really desperate for it to be published.
Yeah, because what's an ebook? That's not being published, is it? That's like if you're making a film or something, you shoot the film and then you just put it on a TV. It's like you want to see it in a cinema. It's like it's got to be proper. So you need a real book.
I need a real book. Need to give my parents bragging rights. Look what my daughter did. So so I was really, really keen for it to be a physical book. And what happens, I discovered, once you have some kind of publication, and you have, you start to do events and things like that. I did an event to promote the book. People start to understand that you're an author, and then that leads to more opportunities as well. So after doing that, I was contacted by First Story, who are a really good literature charity, who place writers in residence at schools, in around the region. And I was in residence for First Story in a couple of schools in Leeds and Bradford, teaching creative writing to teenagers, which was brilliant. And I really absolutely loved doing that. The teenagers, they, I would help them to write something, set them all these exercises so they'd write short stories, poems, and all the rest of it. And at the end of it, they put a book together of their work. It's a really lovely thing for those teenagers who might have thought, oh, well, being an author is not a thing that I can do. It gives them that opportunity to see their words in print. So that's one of the big things that I've done. And I've also off the back of that, have written to commission for Comma Press, who put anthologies together. And I've taught short story writing to adults for Comma Press as well. And that's been a really, really enjoyable thing.
Do you tend to work in sort of genre, or do you like what's your kind of writing field? Do you do non-fiction or like?
A lot of my stuff is fiction that's based on real world events.
Yeah.
So my most recent novel, Guest, is about a young man who finds out that his dad was an undercover cop who infiltrated an activist group that his mum was a part of. And that was kind of based on those true, very true, shocking stories of incidences of that have happened. But that said, when I first started, I wrote a lot of quite weird stuff. So there's this umbrella of fiction that's it's not science fiction or horror exactly. It's just kind of just a bit weird. So it's about the writer M. John Harrison falls under this kind of umbrella, I would say, and Magnus Mills, where they write work that's kind of about our world, but there's something about it that's a bit weird and not completely right. And I did a lot of that early on, and it's something that I've sort of returned to a lot more recently. So I had a story published this year called Backstreet Nursery, which is about a near future where there's no government, people don't vote, and everything is run by civil servants. Because I was really interested in that whole idea about a lot of people don't have trust in politicians. They don't vote because they don't know what's going to happen, and they don't feel like they can trust politicians. Or politicians say they're going to do one thing, and then they get elected and they don't do what they said they were going to. And I was just really interested in that whole idea of, well, what would happen if we didn't have a democracy, but it wasn't a complete dystopia. Things still functioned, but it wasn't run by elected people. So yeah, it's a bit of an experiment. So I'm increasingly starting to do things that are a bit weird because I just find it so interesting.
I think that's a good route to go, though, as well, because, I've said this a few times when I've been talking to artists and stuff. It's like we need, all our stories need to change. It's not like we're moving into a new world. A new world has been put upon us already, and we're in it, even though we're not dealing with it. And, we need these stories to come through. We need new ways of imagining not just the future, but the present and coping with it and everything else that we're going to go through or are going through. So that's the kind of how you got into it. Let's do a bit on the sort of care work then. So what was the kind of thread there? Was it just, you always had a kind of vocational element to the way that you were thinking? Was it always is it just civic mindedness, or is it more of a kind of spiritual kind of mission, or is it just people in your family gave care and that's just something you felt you needed to do?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting question. I suppose it is a bit of civic mindedness, really. When I was at university, I got quite interested in radical politics. I was really interested in the sort of leftist side of things, socialism, anarchism. I wouldn't really fully describe myself as an anarchist, but I have a lot of sympathy for anarchism and a lot of the ideas of thinking about the worlds that are in the anarchist sort of tent, I suppose you'd say. And what I really wanted to do was some kind of work that is useful and that doesn't harm anybody. And it's interesting that I spent a period working in a psychiatric hospital because you might argue that those places and that psychiatry does harm people. And a lot of people argue that it does. And I certainly saw some things that really made me think, oh, well, this isn't always the most helpful way to deal with someone who's very, very ill. So that was kind of an interesting experience to have. But as I said, I worked for a long time in special schools. The longest stint of work that I did, I worked in a special school in Bradford, and I worked in the, they called it the experiential strand. So these are students with life-limiting conditions and profound and multiple learning disabilities. So with those students, the education that you provide as a teacher or as a professional working with those children, it's to encourage those children to learn basic social skills and take turns and do something with each other. You're not teaching those students in the conventional way that you might in other strands of special education, where the children are more able to learn English and maths and science and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
A lot of what I did was concentrate on providing those young people with dignity and with choice, and giving them positive experiences, and making sure basically that those children have some agency and they're not just sitting around being bored all day, which unfortunately I have seen in some less successful special schools. The one that I worked in, I think, was really, really good at providing a meaningful curriculum for students who need to follow a less conventional curriculum, it's fair to say. They were really good at making sure those students had something to do all day and that they were active and they were involved. And I really, really enjoyed that. And the other part of working in this school that I particularly enjoyed was how multicultural it was as well. So I grew up in Wakefield, which for the most part is an extremely white area, not very multicultural at all. Or it wasn't when I grew up. It may be a little bit different now.
Yeah, I'd say it's more mixed now.
Yeah, it's probably a lot more mixed now
But
than it was.
They seem to, the city is, but it's, separate enclaves sort of thing. Not quite redlining like in the US, but it tends to be, people tend to be sort of stuck into housing areas, don't they?
Yeah, that is certainly true. But that was certainly a really interesting experience for me to be in that kind of environment where it's very mixed and where you celebrate everybody's heritage and everybody's traditions. So just things like making sure all religious and all cultural festivals were celebrated.
That's a busy calendar then.
It was there was always a party on at this school, let me tell you, always. Because there's always something to celebrate, and that's really interesting, but also really fulfilling to be around lots of different people and for everyone to feel like their culture and heritage and traditions are important. So that was an aspect of it that I really, really enjoyed, and I stayed in that job for a long time, and that was part of why. But also practically, because working in a school, you have shorter hours, that gave me more time to write. So that was another part of it.
I mean, was it more of a job where you could kind of finish when you finished? You didn't have to take like loads of lesson plans and stuff home as much? Because I guess a lot of the, like you say, is the curriculum sort of already in place and it's kind of just doing that stimulation and engagement work.
Yeah. So in terms of planning, yes, I did have to plan a bit, but I think it's nothing like on the level that you would do if you were teaching mainstream secondary.
Yeah. And you wouldn't be marking or grading or anything, or
well, a little bit, because you
have
have
to
be sure.
Back and sort of say how people are developing.
Yeah, you have to show as well that the students are getting something out of what you're doing and that they are progressing. So yes, there's a bit of data collection, I suppose, but again, it's not hugely onerous the way that it would be if you were teaching the curriculum.
Yeah.
And teaching English and maths, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it, as a worthwhile job that I felt contributed something positive to society and people's lives. It was a really enjoyable job for me. And the other bit of it practically was that it wasn't a job that took up a lot of my free time outside of the time when I was at work. So you'd be at work, I would get to finish at a sort of reasonable time and then have plenty of free time to write. So that's and I think as a creative person, people find different ways to do it. But my way to be creative is to find a job that fits around the creative work.
Okay, so we'll go into the questions. So I will start off with COVID. So the questions about how it's changed your work, what kind of effects and stuff it's had on your work. But what I want to look at as well is sort of, I want you to think about going into lockdown. That's if you did lockdown, and how that came about for you, whether your work kind of dropped off and you were kind of like, oh, I'm not going to have any work, or whether it just increased massively, or like, ooh, big truck.
Yeah, we're right under the flight path.
Yeah. Didn't get that during COVID, did we?
No, I loved that. I hate that they've started again. It's a real pain.
So what's your kind of COVID story? Was it more or less work? Like, how did it go for you? Were you furloughed? Did you lock down? Were you going into work every day? Like, what was your experience?
Yeah, it's been COVID has been like a funny old time for me in terms of work. When it first started at the very first lockdown, I was at the time working for a children's charity, quite a large one, and they put a lot of people on furlough, including me. And I was on furlough for quite a long period, for I think certainly at least 3 months. And then when I came back from furlough, they put me on flexi furlough, so I was only working. I wasn't working the full amount that I had been before. It was a funny thing being on furlough. In a lot of ways, it was a really good thing for me because I got 3 months of dedicated time to work on my writing. I had a lot of ideas that I wanted to work on, and it was such a unique time as well. So one of the things that I was doing throughout COVID is I was keeping a diary of not just things that were happening to me, but things that I'd seen in the news and on social media, because it was such a unique time. And I just thought that some of these things that have happened, they will probably never happen again during our lifetime.
And people won't remember them either, because everyone will just pick little cherry-picked moments from the experience of lockdown. Like I was like, I wanted to keep a record. I was useless. I didn't.
Yes, no, I did. And I didn't write down everything, because what I found was even during lockdown, I was still quite busy. So I didn't keep up with it. But there were certain things that were really like things that the government were doing that or not doing, and changing decisions day by day. And I just thought, people are never going to remember this, and they're not going to believe it when this time is over. So I was trying to make notes of all those things. And the other really positive thing about that period of time was that so many theatres put plays online on streaming for free. So there were lots of plays, and I watched quite a few Shakespeare plays. I watched a few of the Nationals plays that they'd put on. Absolutely brilliant stuff that I would never have got a chance to watch otherwise, because I just wouldn't go to London to watch them. So it was really a positive time in that respect. And I know it was a horrible time for a lot of people, really bad for a lot of people's mental health. Obviously, hundreds and hundreds of people dying every day. That was really, an awful time for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was horrific to see all of the stuff. But you'd be surprised how many people say on here how good a COVID they had. Like,
yeah.
Because there was so much, I think, from that time that was good. Like the roads being quieter, the animals coming back, the air being fresher, not having the noise pollution. Like,
yeah. I mean, all of that. We had a set of goldfinches living in our hedge. We'd never seen them before. Yeah. And every day we'd, get up and have our breakfast, and we'd watch these goldfinches coming out of the hedge. It was such a lovely experience. And yes, you're absolutely right. The noise pollution, a huge thing. We live under the flight path of the airport. So there were no planes, just the quiet of the road, and just appreciating the green spaces that are near us. There are a few really nice local walks that I didn't know existed until COVID that I found.
Yeah.
And I think the whole lockdown and spending that whole period of time, well, really most of that first year, just very, very local and very close to home, dramatically affected how I saw life and the way that I wanted to live my life.
Yeah.
For a long time, I'd been travelling to work, so I'd been commuting to Bradford for a long time, and then another for a period I was in a role where I was working for a children's charity, and I covered all of West Yorkshire, so I could travel, go and do hundreds of miles a day in the car. And I really enjoyed the job, and I think it was a valuable job because I was supporting bereaved siblings who'd lost a brother or sister, and it was, in that perspective, a very valuable job. When the charity brought me back from furlough, I just thought, and I had to go all that way to work, and then go from there to someone's home. I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. Be driving all this way, because I'd been feeling bad about the amount of time I was spending in the car anyway.
Yeah.
From the point of view of my own quality of life, but also from sitting in traffic and causing traffic and being part of that traffic.
Yeah.
And I just thought, well, I don't want to do that anymore. So that kind of set me on quite a dramatic change of the type of work that I would look for and where I would look for it.
Okay, yeah.
So I decided, well, I don't want to do this job anymore, and I will look for a job that's in Leeds, so I don't have to travel. Ideally, I can get to the job by walking, or I can get to the job on the bus. And I kind of decided, well, I don't want to commute any more than about 15 or 20 minutes per day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I did. So that changed the kind of job that I was able to look for and where I was able to look for it. Because the other important thing for me is that it's got to be a good quality part-time job so that I can keep up with the creative work. And you would be surprised, I think, how hard it is to find a good quality part-time job.
I would not. I was just that. My thing was I'll work part-time because obviously I'm not going to get enough money to be running a business off. Like, because I've got no client base. Nobody knows me. I don't know anybody. Like, I won't have enough money coming in. I'm not going to get enough people listening and subscribing initially to have enough donations money-wise. So it's like always with this was just, I'll have a nice part-time job, get somewhere just a couple of days a week, ideally no more than 3, ideally 2. Impossible. And then like when you do want to get them, you're going through basically the same application for a full-time job, like big application forms and stuff. It's just like, I'm only going to be in a couple of times a week. Why don't you just meet me and get me to do a task? That would be so much easier. And like, do you like me? Do you trust what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And going through the application form, and I hate application forms.
Yeah.
And I won't even fill them in now. I'm just like, oh, that looks like a really good job. I'm not going to apply for it though, because I'm putting an application form.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no. Yes, I feel your pain, because a lot of certainly in the, from the point of view of me wanting to do something that's socially useful and contributes to people's lives, that again narrows things down. And a lot of
it's very hard, isn't it? We don't have our society built that way. It's kind of, no, if you want to destroy everything, we can give you loads of money and loads of resources for that. But if you want to actually do stuff that's helpful, you'll have to do that a really difficult way.
Yeah, it's really difficult. A lot of the jobs, because of the nature of the third sector, they're really temporary. So you get a job and you're fixed term for a year or 6 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, so you can't have it credit.
And in the third sector, it's not very well paid. So it's there's a really if we get time, I'll read you a bit of David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs, where he talks about this exact phenomenon about how jobs that are really quite actively evil generally really quite well paid because people wouldn't do them otherwise. But if you do something that's really socially useful and that's enjoyable and where you feel like you get something out of it as an employee, that's considered to be the reward in itself.
Yeah, you should pay to be able to
You should pay to be able to do this job.
You're enjoying yourself. That's not allowed.
Exactly. But it feels in a lot of ways like people's consciousness about work and what work should be and what it should bring to our lives. Our thinking as citizens has changed quite dramatically about that. And I know so many people that have given up work or dramatically shifted their attitude to work during the pandemic. So we, as employees, as workers, our consciousness about what that should be has changed. But the rest of the world and employers and businesses and organisations haven't really caught up with that, I think.
Well, I think a lot of businesses kind of think that they have, like the brain trusts have kind of gone, oh, look at this, we need to do something here. And put out press releases and stuff, but it hasn't trickled through, and the minions are not, they're not following those instructions yet. They're still running off the old programming. Like, no, must do austerity, must do austerity, must do austerity. This is what we were paid for. Yeah, but I think that all of these things are going to change quite rapidly. And then, well, just in the next weeks and months. Not necessarily in ways that we've even been familiar with before, I don't think. Because I just think there's going to be a pace of change. And because everyone always wants to go, oh, it's like, it's like just before the First World War, or it's like the 70s, or it's like this, or conditions are like this. It's like, no, was the world on fire then? Was a third of Pakistan underwater then? No. Were 1.5 million people displaced internally within Africa then? No. It's different now. And also, had the world economy just been switched off for 2 years? Like, all of this has not ever happened before. This is not like any other time in history. This is completely unique as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is. And it is, I find it very frustrating to me to see how individuals' consciousness changed during the pandemic, see how things could be done different during the pandemic, and to see that for a lot of businesses and politicians and powerful people, it seems like nothing has changed, and there's a desire to go back to doing things the way that we did them before. And I think that there was a really valuable once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change things permanently for the good, and to respond to this reality that we're facing. But instead of doing that, the drive has been very much to go, oh, we need to get all the over 50s back into work who have left the workforce. We need to get everyone back to the office. We need to get everyone in the shops and the bars buying, and we need to get people back into city centres and all these kinds of things. And I appreciate that it's been a really hard time for business and for local businesses, and we need to support our local businesses. But that couldn't powerful people, politicians, couldn't we as a society support things to be different and better?
Well, and also, don't we have to?
Yeah.
Like, we have no choice whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like, there is literally no choice. You just have to change everything you're doing, or you're gone.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, that's difficult for us to understand, but it's like, that's the reality.
Well,
no matter how much people ignore it, that's the reality.
People can't even imagine it, I think. This is partly why I want to return to this weird way of writing, because I think a lot of modern science fiction and a lot of modern speculative fiction is really good at grappling with these issues about how radically different things need to be. It is a future that many people can't even imagine, because we do need to do things so radically different. We need to live in massively different ways. And people, I think, most ordinary people just can't even imagine it. But for me, the COVID pandemic and living locally and not being able to do as much and appreciating the natural world, that was one of really big opportunity to show people, well, this is, we could live in a modified version of this. So it's a bit frustrating that, and I hope that a lot of people have had their consciousness shifted by that, but it's really hard to know, I think.
Well, you've got the whole of the, social engineering structure of the media, which is basically just an extension of the corporate and political elite at this point, because it's all owned by the same people. And it's literally just their messaging, like it's their refusal to report really, like the things that are really happening. They need clickbait.
Yeah.
And to them, it's a market logic of, oh, well, these are the things that get clicks. This is why we've got to have Trump back on, because he's so good for, like, we'll make so much money off him. It's like, but then there'll be the same people who are going, oh, how did Trump get in? Oh, this is terrible. He's awful. You put him in. Like 2008 when the financial crash happened. remember seeing stuff on the BBC of like, oh, these people are like, oh, they were just spending all their money willy-nilly on their houses and stuff. And then you look through like, what did you have on through the week? Oh, location, location, location. Oh, like redesign your house. Like every single thing's about housing and like put money into your housing and take money out. And, like, you know, get credit. And then they're like, oh, how did this happen? It wasn't us. We didn't do anything. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway, we kind of went off point there again. This is
Yeah,
gonna happen
sorry.
a lot, I think. So I mean, so coming out of that then, yeah, like the decisions to make those changes.
Yeah.
I mean, have you managed to be quite successful within that? Have you managed to keep to it, or have you had to compromise it? Like, have you found jobs locally easily enough?
Yes, actually, during the pandemic, because of the decision, I've ended up changing jobs quite a lot of time. So the first job that I went to, I really had quite a bad experience, and I was quite unlucky, I think. And that I ended up working somewhere where employees were sort of being told they had to work on site during one of the lockdowns, and they shouldn't have been, in my opinion. There was quite a toxic culture, and it was just a really, really bad experience for me to go there. Luckily, I wasn't there very long. I had such a terrible effect on my mental health that I handed my notice in when I'd been there less than 3 months and I didn't have a job to go to, which I've never done before. And I was lucky that I was able to find a job quite quickly after doing that. But the situation that it put me into was just, it had such a negative effect on my mental health that I was worried that I would never, if I stayed there, I would never be able to work again. I was it was absolutely dreadful. So for me, it was like, oh, I need to get out or I won't be able to work again. That was how bad it was. And I found an absolutely brilliant job working at Health for All, who I can't speak highly enough about, to be honest. They're a charity based in South Leeds who do a lot of community development work for mental health and physical health. So I worked on part of the pandemic response, which was doing some test and trace for COVID, vaccine and testing promotion. But we also did a lot of local groups, so peer support mental health groups, a social supermarket, food pantry, exercise, women-only exercise classes, parents and tots group, I should say. Loads of really, really positive things that people in that local area needed. Some of the things that we had to do, like the social supermarket, I'm really proud to have been a part of that, but I also think at the same time, schemes like that shouldn't need to exist in a country as wealthy as Britain, but it responded to a need and it did help a lot of people. And the social supermarket that I was working in still runs today, and I know they have a lot of customers. And it's it's really helping people at a time when they need it. So what was really positive about that job is that I was doing something that was really, really needed, helping people, and I felt like my skills were being used in a really positive way. And that was an absolutely brilliant experience. And I'm so glad to have been able to go there and had that positive experience after the really awful one I'd had previously. So I was really, really glad to have had the chance to work there, doing something important during the important and useful during the pandemic. It was a temporary role because it was part of the pandemic response.
So they probably had like a month's worth of money or something for somebody. And
well, it was a job for a year, so I had hoped that it would continue on because that service was commissioned by the council, and of course I loved the job so much. I just hoped, oh well, maybe they'll just find some money and I'll get to stay on. But they didn't find the money, and I didn't get to stay on. My job was made redundant, which I kind of am obviously disappointed about on a personal level. But it brings up this wider issue about the third sector, which is that the third sector in Leeds delivers a lot of really valuable on-the-ground support to people, helps local people in really important ways, but so much of it is so precarious that projects have funding for a year and they run and then they stop. and to keep these important groups and services running, third sector managers always have to look for opportunities for new funding. And that's if there's one negative thing about the way that support is provided to people through the third sector, that's it really. It's the continual search for funding to keep important services going. But I did really love it. And then I was made redundant, and then I went to Val, where I'm a project coordinator. And again, that's a part-time job, and it's a job primarily working with organisations. So most of my previous work has been working with people directly. This is more about working with organisations to deliver a project. So making sure that we're on track, we're delivering certain things on time, and that we hand in our monitoring and financial reports to the funders, who are the National Lottery. And it is a climate project. I work on climate action Leeds.
Nice.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's good. It's a really, really interesting project, and I think a really valuable project. And it's big, and there's lots of community-led work that happens as part of this project. Lots and lots of community work, as well as the citywide movement building stuff. So it's a really valuable project. And I work on it 3 days a week. And because it's a big project, I'm just always so busy. Everyone in it is busy because there's so much going on all the time.
And because it's a big topic, you know, and it's one of those of like, it's something you want to work on. Like, yeah, I get that same sense. Like, I'd be in your position. I'd be like, yeah, I want to do more of this, especially if I feel it's effective work. Like, if I feel that I'm actually, like, we're making movement here, it's going somewhere, I'd just get more and more into that. And
and I think
doesn't it?
Yeah, and one of the challenges with it is that people. I really want it to be it is a successful project, and I want to deliver more and more. But we're within the funding that we have, we are contracted to deliver certain things, and everyone in the project is so passionate about it, and people always want to do, what about if we did this, and what about if we did that? And sometimes I kind of find myself reining people in and saying, well, let's make sure we don't try and do too much, because everyone's, that didn't come out right. Not try and do too much.
Start again.
No, let's not. It's more a kind of, let's not try and overburden ourselves by delivering more than we can within the hours that we've got.
Yeah. Like, let's keep these plates spinning.
Yeah, you know, let's keep everything manageable.
Once we've got all these like spinning properly and we're on it, we can put the next one spinning and then work on the next one.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a great project, and I enjoy working on it, and I love seeing all the different things that happen as a result. You know, there's been a lot of really exciting things that have happened. You know, food growing projects on pieces of land that used to be waste ground. You know, free bike fix cafes in parts of Leeds where people just wouldn't have access to that. You know, lots of really, really exciting stuff. It's very genuinely exciting to be a part of it.
I think we're like, at some point there will be like a dam break of media coverage, if we still have media at that point. But it will be like a sort of, it'll just change overnight. Like, the media will at some point start treating it seriously, you know, like from, you know, like war propaganda. It will just go, right, this is what we're doing now. And all of the stuff that you see now, like even being involved in projects now where you're getting like ideas that you'd never come across, even though, you know, like I read a lot of climate literature. I always have. I've always been interested in various things. So I've got like loads of ideas from loads of different people who've said, do this. But you always have new ones, you know, when you meet other people, they've always got something new, a different take. And like, there will be just such an explosion of stuff at that point, I think, that it'll be mind blowing.
Do you know what I've discovered from working on this project is that a lot of people are really concerned about the climate.
Yeah.
A lot of people are.
Yeah. Most of us, I think.
Yeah. I think but
you wouldn't be able to tell that from the press, would you? Or the way that anyone on TV talks.
Yeah.
Like, there's no inkling.
It's really been a bit of a surprise to me, because I did think in some of the places where the project works that it'd be a bit of an uphill battle. in getting people interested. That has not been my experience at all.
We're desperate for it.
People are really, really keen to be involved in projects that make a difference, in their local areas, where they can, get involved. People are really, really, they're so keen to get involved. But yeah, as you say, you wouldn't really know that from reading the local paper, perhaps.
Or even conversations in the pub, but that's the cooling effect of media as well, because what do people talk about in the pub? They talk about the sports pages and the front pages, like they talk about the main things, which are always not the important things.
Do you not think, because I think there has been a bit of a change over the past year or two in the way that the media reports the climate, reports on climate issues, certainly over how they used to report it 10 years ago. I remember watching the BBC News.
Minuscule.
Where the top headline was, climate change is real, it's caused by humans, and it's affecting us now. That was a couple of years ago. I remember seeing that, and I remember thinking, my goodness, they've never said that before.
But then this year, when we hit 40 degrees, they're still showing pictures of people eating ice creams with the sunglasses on. Like, oh, this is great. We're all going to cook. Yay.
Yeah, that is true. That was very, very, very disappointing. Yeah.
Even now with all the material, it's like, it's just because COP's on and loads of the other stuff to kind of distract from that. And loads of the other stuff is just to confuse it all and say, oh, they're doing loads of really good stuff. No, they're not doing loads of really good stuff. It's like, they're not getting to the truth. And there will be a drop off again. Like, even if there's, I mean, again, going back to like the floods in Nigeria and Niger and Pakistan, like, you just don't see it. And nobody's talking about it, are they? Everyone's talking about Jeremy Hunt at the moment. It's like, he doesn't matter. I mean, I know on like the small levels of, all the amount of homeless people that are going to be created again now. But the bigger thing is, he's not important. Something more important that's really actually happening is happening, and we need to deal with that, not waste our time with this news. That's my take.
Yeah. I would like to see the climate covered more regularly on the news. I think it's such a pressing issue, and it's so immediate to us. I think it's I'm not a journalist, so I don't know what the best way to cover it would be. But I think for me, there's certainly been a lack of understanding that we need to radically change the way we live. And that's something I'd really like to see more of in the media. What are the changes that people can make to make a positive difference? There's a bit of a lack of acknowledgement, and this is it's well known as a driver in climate change, is that inequality is a major driver of climate change. There's a lack of acknowledgement of that, I think, in mainstream news sources. It was something that I didn't really realise until I worked on Climate Action Leeds. I kind of had a bit of an inkling, but I didn't know for sure until I read the most recent IPCC report, where it's highlighted that that's a major driver. It was something I hadn't realised. And I read a lot of the news. I read the news every day, and I watch the news every day. But I didn't know that until I read the IPCC report, which arguably is quite a specialist thing. Most people, I think, wouldn't, normal. Let's take a normal person. I'm a normal person, but your casual person wouldn't read it. And I did not have that highlighted to me as a person who watches the news every day until I read this report.
But I think that's part of the same thing as well, though. That like they're trying to keep this idea in our heads of this imaginary person, like the Murdoch reading, white van driving. I just burn the climate. It's all rubbish anyway. Let's nail hippies up. Like I'm sure there's some of these imaginary characters out there, but like, most people aren't that.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it is largely a media image, like you get these. I mean, how many times have I seen things where they're going, you know, like this person from this organization or this party has been planted in this thing for this clip and things like that. And it is, and then you can't, then you go into like, oh, being conspiratorial and stuff. But it's like you talk to people and then you read the papers and then you talk to people and then you watch the news and you're like, hang on, it's different. It's not the same here. This thing that's supposed to reflect the world is not reflecting the world as it actually is. You know, look in the TV hole, there's all chaos and horror and drama, and I look out the window hole and it's trees and birds and traffic, admittedly. But
I think though as well, it's not just the media. It is about the way that society is organised and the way that we we live in the Western world. And I think there needs to be a more wholesale societal level grappling with the issue that we need to live differently. And
which can only happen when the media does that. I think that's the thing. Go on, sorry.
Do you think? I don't know. I have kind of.
Because it is a propaganda system. It's 24/7, you know, like from adverts to like, even within newspapers, business model is to get eyes to sell to advertisers. They don't make money off the cover price. They make money off selling audiences to advertisers. So they've got to appeal to advertisers. And who are the biggest advertisers? Car companies, travel companies, fossil fuel industry, like, you know, and then they influence, we know this from, you know, 100 years of, you know, sponsorship, TV, media, newspapers, like they interfere. There's supposed to be an editorial separation, but they interfere. And even when they're not directly interfering, there's a financial incentive to keep those clients. So it's like they can't report on it. It's like the same way that the people who are in power, they can't say we need to do something about this because the people who are stopping them are the ones that own them.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg, I think, in a way. What I've found from working on this project, as I say, is that local communities often really, really want to do something about the climate. They know how important it is and they want to make a change and they want to be involved in that change. But I also often think powerful people like politicians and business owners, they don't want to do anything that's unpopular. Particularly politicians.
Or will hurt their donors.
Yeah. So, but in terms of business and big businesses, they exist to make money. So, obviously, big globally owned businesses don't want to do anything to damage that aspect of their work. But politicians, I think, are more likely to act when there's a critical mass of people who are saying we want change.
Absolutely.
We want urgent change.
Absolutely. But that's why they're making such an effort to make sure that never arrives, that's never visible, that, you know, you divide people through the press, that you crush dissent as soon as it appears, that you keep people scared, that you keep people precarious, that you keep people overwhelmed and distracted and confused so that they're too exhausted to organize to do anything. But ultimately people will, because they always do. Because if you look at, like, you know, the poorest countries with terrible dictatorships, eventually people get to a point of like, we've had enough of this. Like it does happen. But again, you know, it's running against the clock, isn't it? I've gone off on a big rant on this and I'm really sorry. It was coming. I've been stewing for a couple of weeks. So I'm not going to ask the climate change question because I think we've kind of covered that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's fine.
So I'm going to shut up on your answers for these next questions. So, I mean, is there anything else you want to add there or anything you want to cover before I move on? Because, yeah, I don't want to like not let you reply. So,
yeah, on the subject of climate change and where fiction is really good at grappling with this, there's a whole genre of fiction called cli-fi, which is about climate relevant fiction, and it is an area that a lot of writers are writing about currently. A lot of the best, the most exciting writing is happening in that area. Recently, there was a novel called Sealed that came out by an author called Naomi Booth, which is sort of in this area. And it is, weirdly, it came out before the pandemic, but it is about a pandemic. And it's about people living on ever smaller and smaller pieces of land as the pandemic comes closer to them. So it's something that I think fiction authors are grappling with. I think the role of fiction and art really is important in this, because the role of fiction and art can be to encourage people to see the world in different ways and to give them the opportunity to visualize a different future and radically different world. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I would agree. I watched, was just watching a video on YouTube this morning on, have you heard of solar punk?
No.
Yeah, so it was quite an interesting video. He was basically saying, so there was a manifesto of like solar punk. And they were saying a good way of thinking of it is Miyazaki, you know, the Japanese animator who did like Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, those sort of films, saying there's a lot of that in there, you know, like having it local, having it optimistic, having it being about integrations with nature. So it's not about domination, but nature's, you know, part of us again, rather than separate from us, that kind of thing. Yeah, like I absolutely agree with you there. It is about not even creating beautiful futures, but just possible futures, like realistic versions or realistic versions of now. Like, I mean, even the story they're trying to tell with, you know, their blinkers on of like, this is the media story, this is the official version. That doesn't appear to be resonating with anyone, you know, like they seem to be in their own weird little echo chamber where they're kind of going, this has always worked. We do this thing. It works. We just do this. Like, it's not working. Yeah. I think you know, they're having the same. This is why we've been through, as much as people want to blame Brexit or blame the credit crunch, which I'll go back to quite often, but I see these things as being integral to climate change as well. They are, it's all part of the same degrading system, and it's sort of cannibalizing itself at this point, and I certainly see that as kind of speeding up. But yeah, positive futures. You have to remember, come back to positive futures
and when we had you know, we had our climate assembly in October, we had members of the youth parliament speak and some youth activists speak. And this is something they talked about a lot, about the need for optimism, because climate change it's a huge and overwhelming and pressing problem. And that could potentially be quite depressing, and that depression can make it less likely for you to act. But there's a need for optimism there, and this is something that the youth activists talked about a lot. And I think it's something that anyone who's interested in climate we should all be thinking about it, the need for optimism.
Well, yeah, to a degree, but I do like the latest sort of XR slogan of like, hope dies, work begins. Like, I do think there's a lot of people who, you know, a lot of people need the truth. They need the upfront truth. And I think that a lot of that kind of the despair and disillusionment and inaction, generally that comes about when you're on your own. Like I saw someone speaking yesterday, they put this beautifully, I can't remember the name of the lady, but I sort of I liked it on LinkedIn or whatever. But yeah, she just beautifully put of like, you know, this is not something far off. This is like people that we've failed already, you know, like 1.5 million people in Africa that have been displaced, a third of Pakistan. Like, these are people that are dying, being impacted now. Even here, you know, like farmers whose crops have been like destroyed by 40-degree heat or whatever. Like, you know, this thing is happening to people now, and to just deny their experience and to deny other people's experience and their want to change these things, I don't think that can last forever. But yeah, she was sort of freely crying about it. It's like, I'm upset. This is upsetting. That's okay. I can be upset about it. But she was saying that, you know, when you're acting with other people, that makes you stronger. You know, like, and it builds your resolution because you are with other people, so you can do something. But when we're sort of separated from one another, it is this sort of, what can I do? And just feeling guilty kind of thing. And then
I do think, you know, collective action is really, really important. You know, really important. It's important to work together with your communities and your neighbours and your you know, friends and communities of interest. And this is one reason why I think another positive thing that happened during the pandemic is that people did connect up with their neighbours and look upon their neighbours and and volunteer to help people in their local community.
Yeah.
Um,
And
it
actually go to
galvanised
the
a lot of
park
people.
nearby and things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that again for me is another aspect of the COVID pandemic that I would really love to see continue. But I think the pressures of life for a lot of people have made continuing that kind of community work really difficult. I'm sure we'll come on to talking about that a bit more.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of a contrast between, like, there's a way that people thought perhaps they would be or wanted to be when they came out of this, and then it's kind of, oh look, we're back to, it's like when we locked down and everyone was like, when we get back to normal, and like, oh, we'll get back to normal, and then we're back to normal now, and everyone's like, this isn't good, is it? So people forget how awful 2019 was.
Yeah, and I hope you're right. I hope that people know things are back to normal, if you want to put it that way. People are going, oh, this isn't actually all that good, is it? I know I feel that way. I do sometimes. I'm sort of working my way down to giving up my car for good. I haven't quite got there yet. I still use my car a couple of days a week, and I notice even more now how bad traffic is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if traffic is actually worse than it used to be before the pandemic, or if I just notice it more.
Yeah.
But every time I go in my car and I get stuck in a traffic jam, or I notice the traffic jam on the other side of the road, I think to myself, this is terrible. This is awful. Why are we living like this?
Yeah. Go on.
But, are other people thinking the same or thinking similar? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing. Ideally, the media should be there going, "Oh yeah, we're all thinking this, and we're all doing stuff." But yeah, you're just sitting there going, "Like, am I crazy? Am I just taking crazy pills? Is everyone fine with this? Is this what everyone wants to do? This is what we want to do. We all want to head over this cliff. Is that what we're doing? Are we all fine with this? Yeah. Okay. It's just me that's mad then." But no, I don't, I think that's really common experience. And I think a lot of people, I anger quicker now in traffic. It's like, it is worse. And especially when you've had the experience of, like, if you had to go anywhere during lockdown, and you took the car, you're like, God, I got here so quick because there was no traffic.
Yeah, it is. It's a big thing to go back to sitting in traffic after using your car during COVID.
Yeah. But it's not played out yet, I don't think. I think we're going to see lots of things sort of falling out from that. But,
I will be interested to see. I think, I don't know. I mean, from talking to people among my friend group, I've had a lot of friends who have dramatically changed their attitudes to work and the way they organise their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be interesting to see whether that is a broad scale change across society, or whether it's just my, where I'm seeing it within my group of friends. I think the pandemic has made people really radically rethink their lives.
But I think one of the other things that I'm going to shut up. I will shut up. One of the other things that I've banged on about in this show is that I think, like, we really, really underestimate the power of peer pressure. And it's not so much that, like, go and talk to all your friends and family about climate change and, bend their ear. But I think when you start making real lifestyle changes and modeling behavior, and then they see that more, like, that's more powerful, because, what's the thing of someone who, like, why have I got on a plane and done a long haul flight if I'm supposedly so passionate about this and bang on about it all the time? Why have I done that in my lifetime if I know and I'm aware of these things? It's like, well, I wanted to go places and everyone else was going, and nobody in power gave a damn about the climate. And he was like, yeah, let's burn as much as we want. So it was like, well, I may as well go to Australia then. Like, what the hell? But, that's not something that I would do now. Can't afford it for a start. But, I wouldn't. I don't want to do more long haul flights. And I'm with you. Ideally, I would like to have no car journeys next year. I don't want to be on anything that's not public transport or, like on foot or a bike. Ideally, that's where I want to be. But I think those things are really important for getting other people to change, because when they see people have changed like that, it's easier for them to do it, I think.
Yeah. One thing that I think I've been really pleased about is that all the northern mayors have brought in this mayor's fares thing for the buses.
Yeah.
£2 for a bus ride, and I think it's like £4.50 or something for the all day bus ticket. That is brilliant. Ideally, it would be cheaper or free.
Yeah.
But that is a huge improvement. I use the bus a lot more now because I feel like, well, it's worth it now. £2. It's and often I would go a lot of places on foot. I'm quite a big walker, but now if I'm in a rush to get somewhere, I'll get on the bus because it's affordable now in a way that it wasn't before.
Yeah.
I mean, like if you pay, I can't remember how much it was before. It was knocking on for £3, wasn't it? I think for a single fare bus
more
journey.
Expensive than London.
Yeah, it's. Don't even get me started on how much public transport in the north. But when you're paying like knocking on for £3 and the journey's only 15 minutes long, you really feel like you've been had, don't you?
Well, you have.
Yes.
You've been mugged again.
Yeah. You've been mugged and you've paid for the privilege.
Yeah. So I want to go to UBI.
Yeah.
So, so my question here, it's basically a way of asking, like if money was no object, what would you do? But using the UBI to frame it is a nice way of promoting UBI, and it may not be the best or only solution, but got to propose something, and people need money in their pockets. So if there was a UBI and you had your basic needs met and so on, how do you think it would change your work? Would you still be doing what you do now? If you would still be doing what you do now, would you be doing more or less of it? Or would you be doing something else entirely different? Like, how would it change things for you?
Right, well, this is a point where I say, I hope my manager from work isn't listening. If we had a UBI, I have to be honest, if we had a UBI, I probably would not work very much in a paid role.
You'd write full time.
I would write full time.
Yeah. Because
it would make a massive difference to my work. I'd be able to do more quickly, be able to do more ambitious projects, be able to devote more time to it, which I can't do at the moment because I need to generate a living, which is, why I work. I do like to work because I feel when I work, I like to feel like I'm doing something useful. So that's a huge motivator for me. I like to feel like I'm doing something socially useful. So there's a good chance if we had UBI, I would work most of the time, and probably a few hours a week, I would probably volunteer or possibly go back to working a few hours, maybe in a special school or in a community centre like I used to work out for Health for All, so that I'm using my skills to help other people and to do something useful, and to get out of the house, to be honest. Because when you write, you're just by yourself all the time. For me as a writer, in the interest of maintaining good mental health, it's good to be out in the world and be out with people. So I would look at doing some kind of form of community work, and I would probably teach more as well, teach more creative writing. One of the things that I really enjoyed, I used to run a short story festival. One of the things that I did was put writers in residence in really local areas. So Richard Smith did a writers in residency project for us in Middleton Park in South Leeds. And just putting writers in residence in people's local areas so that they can go and participate in a writing workshop, write about their local area, write about their lives. I think that's really valuable, and to make that creativity obtainable and possible for people. Because I think one of the things that happens a lot with creativity is people just think, oh, that's not for me, that's not something I do. They might watch something on telly, watch a soap or watch a YouTube video or listen to the radio or whatever it is, and think, oh, that's something that somebody else does, and it's a long way between them and that. But I think creativity is really important for people, and everyone has the right to be creative, and everyone should have the opportunity to be creative. I think humans are intrinsically creative, and people are creative all the time, but they probably just don't think of it.
Mm.
You know, if you make a meal from whatever few things you've got in the fridge, that's creativity.
Mm.
If your child tells you the night before World Book Day, or it's World Book Day tomorrow, you haven't got them a costume, so you make them something out of whatever you've got in the house. That's creative. So people are creative all the time, but they don't think of themselves as artists or writers or whatever it is. And I think, you know, everyone should have that opportunity because it makes our lives fuller, more positive, more enjoyable, and it enables us to think of things in a different way. And I think what happens at the moment is because people are very divorced from that part of their lives and that part of themselves, partly because there's not a lot of access to creativity in people's local areas, I think. And people often think, it's something you need to be a special type of person to do, or you need to have gone to university to do it. I don't think that at all. I think we need more. I'd like to see more of this kind of thing offered to more types of people, you know, apprenticeships, short form workshops where people can just go and join in and learn to do something. Lino printing, knitting, you know, writing short stories, making art, making sculptures out of pottery, whatever it is. People should have those opportunities.
So
I'm not offering to teach all of those things.
No. So what I'm thinking about there is like physical space for these things to happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, we see a lot of this in Leeds with like some of the school road closures and things like that, where they're trying to create spaces for people to play. But like one of the problems through sort of the late 90s into the 2000s and through financialization has been the loss of public space, privatization of public space. And I've talked about this early on the podcast as well, of like, you know, it's so hard just to go and meet someone somewhere that's free. It's like you could go to the park, but if it's raining, you're going to get wet. But otherwise, you've got to go in a coffee shop or something like that, or even going into a library. Like there are less libraries now, but you don't always think about it. Like you're not going to invite your friend to the library.
Do you want to go and hang out, buy the books?
Yeah, no, most normal people wouldn't do that. Like I have started doing that, but
yeah,
you're not going to.
It is a massive problem, spaces. And, you know, earlier on when I talked about the third sector and the third sector always having to look for sources of income, the third sector, I think, which offers a lot of really valuable community spaces, has been affected by this as well. So many third sector organisations who exist for the good of the communities often can't afford to let their spaces out for free. They always have to charge for them because they need the income. And that's not a criticism of third sector organisations. I think a lot of them have been forced into that position. So that's an issue. And I think as well, you know, the loss of more public spaces, it is a huge issue. But I think, I do think as well that COVID has brought about a sea change in people's attitudes to how they think about space and where they want to meet people. I know that in my group of friends, I certainly want, and there are other people in my group of friends who aren't that keen now on going into town to meet people because it's
horrible.
Busy, it's loud, it's horrible. You have to spend money, you know. It's and it's a long way to go. I feel like I don't want to go into town. It feels like it's miles away. So, in my group of friends, a lot of people have just started to meet up for a walk instead.
Yeah.
So we'll meet up. We'll bring a takeaway coffee in a mug from home. We'll walk around the woods together, And all through COVID, I was doing that with a lot of friends in local woods. You know, sometimes you get wet and you get cold, and that's not that pleasant. But
that's fine. You know, like if you're supposed to be out and about and it's just part of the day, that's fine. But, you know, like when you have to go out into and you could be inside, that's not so fine.
Yeah,
or you have to do it every day.
Thinking about indoor spaces, that is definitely a bit more of a challenge. I think it will be interesting to see what happens this coming winter. A lot of organisations are starting to offer this warm spaces now, which is, you know, as you know, places where people can just go and they can get warm and they can just hang out. All of the city hubs are offering it. So that's the libraries.
Through the day while it's warmer.
Yeah, through the day. Yeah, they're offering it through the day. And I do agree with you about the loss of public space in libraries. This again was an effect of austerity, I think.
Yeah.
The libraries, they're now sharing space with job shops and things like that. So the amount of
I
floor
actually
space
think
for the
that's
library
good,
is
though.
yeah. Yeah, it is. It's because it brings more people into the library,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing in a lot of ways. But one of the effects is that libraries, they have, well, both of those organisations that are sharing the space, they lose the floor space,
Yeah.
and they lose meeting spaces, and they lose communal spaces.
Yeah.
So if someone needs a room to do a workshop or to do a class or whatever, there's increased competition for that space.
Mm.
I think there's a huge argument for there to be more communal spaces provided. I'd be in favour. The issue is always going to be for community organisations and for faith-based organisations that have those spaces. The issue is always going to be money. And how do I getting those spaces open safely, being able to afford to heat them, make sure they're safe and they're well looked after. Again, the challenge is always going to be how will those places, if they open those spaces, how do they make sure they're safe and how can they afford to open them?
Make them sacred so that they're religious and they're like a church and you can't charge tax on them.
That's a really interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
But we'll have to do things like that. Like if we're going to bring nature back, then there'll have to be levels of like, look, we actually value these trees, or we value this, or we value this thing that's giving us fresh air. And I think we know the shape of a lot of things, of like things that will need to happen. We just don't know how they're going to happen and get us there and what shape they're going to take, I think.
Yeah.
But I think we'll see a lot of things, a lot of this stuff, because it has been 30 years of, like largely climate inaction, but it's not like there's been no movement. Like there's been a climate movement for 30 years, like going through various shapes and discussions and changing different strategies. So I think a lot of the knowledge has already been created and a lot of the methods and strategy are kind of being worked out, and now it's just doing it, I think. Hopefully. We'll do social media because we haven't covered that, and it'd be interesting to get your take on it. I mean, do you have to do much social media? So again, the question's on like how much has it affected your work, but I want to look at how much time you have to put into social media, and do you feel that time is a good use of your time? It's a good investment of time, and it gives a good return.
Yeah. I don't know when you're going to put this show out, but it'll be really interesting to know what's happened with Twitter by the time this show goes out. It could not exist anymore, conceivably.
Yeah.
I will say that I, like many other writers, have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Twitter.
Yeah.
And with social media generally. A lot of writers I know absolutely love Twitter because in the literary world, if you're a small, non-famous author, you have to have some way of promoting yourself and promoting your work. And Twitter has been really good for me. I know that I've got work from Twitter in the past because people can look at your Twitter feed, they can see what kind of person you are, what kind of work you do, what kind of skills you have, and they can really easily contact you. And I've taught classes in the past that have sold out really quickly. I taught one class early on where what was really nice was that someone saw that the class was available and the person got in touch with the organisation running the course and bought a couple of places to give away to people that wouldn't have been able to take the course otherwise.
Yeah.
And they did that because they'd seen it on Twitter. And you hear a lot of really positive success stories like that about Twitter. Arguably, writers like it because we're just by ourselves a lot of the time. When you take a break from writing, you can just go and see what's everyone doing on Twitter, and it's a bit like going into a break room. Everyone's messing about, making stupid jokes. It's good, and I've had a lot of really good laughs out of Twitter. But I think it can be very bad for your mental health.
Oh yeah.
And I've there were periods of time during the pandemic where I came off Twitter entirely because there was so much misinformation on there. You hear a lot of bad news and people kind of catastrophize a bit, and people sometimes sometimes put out information that's not all that reliable. And so at points during the pandemic when I was really worried, I just stopped looking at it because it wasn't a big help to me. In recent months, I've found Twitter less and less useful for connecting with people. Since it became more algorithm heavy, it doesn't always show your tweets to your followers. And it doesn't always, sometimes it hides your tweets. And I'd put things out that previously would have got loads of engagement and loads of chatter and like just to no reaction at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because I took a period of time off and it kind of punishes you a bit, or because Twitter just goes, at some level, the algorithm's just gone, this is not going to be interesting enough.
Yeah.
And they bury it. There's nothing I can really do about that. I mean, and I think when you engage with social media, just going back to my kind of interest in anarchism and cooperatives, basically these networks that exist, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they're not community owned. They're owned for the most part by one guy, one rich guy. We're kind of in a way handing over that opportunity for connection and community where we're completely in the hands of that guy who owns the medium. So it's kind of a bit like dancing with the devil. Yes, it's good because I've met some really interesting people. It's got me work and I've laughed a lot on Twitter and got to know people and got to know people better. It's been really positive in that way. And I could even say it's possible that Twitter got me my first publishing contract because Nathan followed me on Twitter and got to know who I was. But these things can just end so quickly. Like MySpace, Friendster, Friends Reunited, Tumblr, all these networks that used to exist that now no longer exist. And there were some message boards that I used to really like that now no longer exist because people just stop using them for one reason or another, because it becomes unusable, people get interested in something else, whatever it is. And Twitter, and what is striking is how quickly it can happen. So again, it like these things reach a bit of a critical mass. So what's happened with Twitter is Elon Musk has bought it. He's fired a load of people very quickly, arguably some very crucial people who ensure that your data is secure, who ensure that moderation is enforced. So there's not things like hate speech and Holocaust denial and all that kind of thing. I've noticed a difference in the amount of hate speech on Twitter over the past week. Is that because he's fired people or because that the direction of travel is people can say what they want now? That again goes back to it's not community owned. So whoever at the top says, it's fine, people can say whatever they want. And people can. And for the majority of users, that makes it completely unconscionable to be on there. And it makes it an unusable platform. So for me, it was already borderline unusable anyway, because it wasn't promoting my work the way that it had done at one point. And then now that moderation is becoming less and less and people's data is less secure, I feel I don't want to use it anymore.
It's more of a Wild West. It's like you don't know who, because it could go anywhere in the world. You don't know who could respond to things.
You don't know. You don't know. And I it's possibly not so bad for me as it is for people with a higher profile or people of marginalised communities. But there are a lot of weird people out there, and it can be, these things can become dangerous quite quickly in the real world. What I imagine happening is that it will become unusable very quickly, and that it will lose a critical mass of users that made it an interesting platform to use. So a lot of my writer friends now are moving to Mastodon. If enough people stop using Twitter, move to other platforms, or just stop using social networking altogether, Twitter will lose the thing that made it interesting, which is the people.
But I mean, to a degree as well, like I think there's this idea has developed again in the media that, sort of Facebook and Twitter would be things that lasted. Yeah, that's not the history of the internet, though, is it?
No. I think yeah.
Why would that ever happen? That's never happened before. Oh, it's just mature now, so Facebook will be around forever. No. Like, who
No.
wants to go on it?
No, I hate Facebook.
Exactly.
I'm on it, but I very rarely use it. I absolutely hate it. And again, you're kind of handing all your data over, and the thing that makes it valuable and makes it free is that you're handing all your data over, and you can then be advertised to. That's how these platforms make their money, I think, a lot of the time.
But you can't be if you leave.
Yeah, no, you can't be. You can't be if you leave. That is very true. But the challenge, certainly for me as a creative person who doesn't have a profile, I'm not hugely famous. I need to have a way of connecting with people.
Yeah.
And advertising my work and getting work and all that kind of thing. I've got a website. I now have a Mastodon profile, and I really like Mastodon so far. But it's quite. I think you need a technical level of knowledge, or you need someone to guide you how to use Mastodon. It's not for everybody. I know that a lot of people have moved on to it, but I don't see people adopting it in huge numbers. And that's kind of the nature of it. It's a slightly smaller platform, and maybe for me, for now, that's what I want. But collapse of Twitter, I think, is going to be a real challenge for independent publishers in the UK, because this is the platform that so many publishers and authors use to promote themselves and use to connect with others. I don't quite know where people are going to go or how that's going to work. Some people are moving to Mastodon, others are moving to Instagram. I think we're going to see a big diffusion of people across different networks. And I think it will be hard to replace it, but each social network has the thing that makes it unique. And I think you sort of would be living in a bit of a cloud cuckoo land if you just went, oh, well, everyone's going to go here or everyone's going to go there, and it'll just be the same thing but in a different place. That's not how social media works, because part of what makes it interesting is the way the platform works.
Do you use any... Sorry, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was probably just going to ramble on a bit there. But...
well, I was just thinking then, like, do you use any like Slack or Trello or any of these, like workflow or interwork kind of, internal sort of communication tools?
Yeah, Slack we use at work. I don't really use it very much for any kind of personal life stuff or for author stuff.
Because I can see things going in a kind of, that's how people use it work-wise, and then there's like there's like an internal facing use for things where you're just dealing with, like your friends group and things that you would have if you're in a circle, and then like an outward facing broadcast kind of, your many to many. Because like I can see more gimmicky kind of platforms coming up, but over the long term, it's just like, it will always be that. It will always have to be something fashionable rather than something that's practical. If something that was built that was just practical for that, it would be really boring in terms of kids and stuff using it and the young users and the advertisers and so on. Yeah. So I can see that kind of thing happening forever, but I can see us working in new ways on some of these internal tools like Teams, like Slack, where they become much more like the kind of Facebook and Twitter stuff that we saw before, where maybe you can post externally and things like that.
That's a really interesting thought. I hadn't really thought of that. I think that, it's an interesting thought about the internal and the external facing, because I think Twitter, what was unique about Twitter is that it has that mix of things.
Yeah.
You can send out things that are for particular audiences, and it's kind of a mix of internal and external. You've got the DMs function and all that kind of thing. Slack, I think, is it kind of has a particular function where it is really useful for you if you're working in a team, and Microsoft Teams. I think one of the crucial differences between these workflow tools and social media that you might use for leisure, arguably, is that when you use Microsoft Teams or Slack, you use it because that's what your employer or your project says, right, we're using this. And that's then what you use. But Twitter, nobody at the publisher is my boss, and nobody says, you have to be on Twitter. I mean, it might have made a difference to me getting my publishing contract if I wasn't on it, because I think independent publishers do look for you to have some kind of profile now. And I think that's going to be increasingly hard to replace. But I think maybe there is a bit of a niche in the market, and people do like social media to stay in touch with people and to waste time. You know, it can be a great laugh sometimes. So I think that I think it's likely that some bright spark or somebody will develop a tool or a social media platform that'll just be really exciting and new, and people will want to use it.
Or they'll do something that's got like loads of retro features where you could turn it into old school Twitter or Facebook or something like that, you know, like it's something really gimmicky.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, like the thing that I really value about Mastodon that appeals to me is that it's run by volunteers and it's defederated. So it's not like one guy who runs it. It's groups of people. And they do it because they like it and they're not making money from it, really. So like for my sensibility, that really, and politically, that appeals to me. But it's, as I say, I don't think it probably appeals to a certain type of person, and it's probably never going to have the enormous user base that something like Twitter had. And if it did, I probably wouldn't like it as much. Because one of the things that's nice about it is that it's quieter and you don't have people shouting at you all the time or getting offended about something you wrote. You know, people are very, well, I don't know. I'm saying people are very easily offended on Twitter. I think that's part of the nature of the platform to encourage confrontation.
It's the easiest way to get engagement, though, unfortunately, because, you know, the best way to get a reaction out of someone is to, you know, incite them.
Incite a mob.
This is kind of, you know, you ask normal questions, you just got no reaction. It's like, let's go better, everyone. What? Yeah. Okay, so I've been terrible on the timekeeping for this, and I've been terrible on the questions as well. I've just been taking us on tangents. So I'm going to go on to, we'll try and do Brexit quickly. Basically, has it had any effect on your work? Anything that you can see or notice? Like, has anything changed for you since we Brexited?
Yes, I think so. I think in the context, the wider cultural context, in terms of some of the festivals and things that I used to enjoy now no longer receive EU funding. So things like the Leeds International Film Festival, which is one of my absolute highlights of the year, I think was slightly smaller this year because it didn't have the EU funding. And
I did not know about that.
Yeah. So they used to have EU funding, and within the third sector, there are projects that used to get EU funding that now no longer do. So I think it's affecting the landscape of the third sector as well. It's, you know, there's the funding that has been brought in to replace it is smaller. The pot's not as big. That's affecting how many projects can be run and how many jobs there are. In terms of publishing, yes, I know it's had an effect because some of the independent publishers that I follow and are interested in have talked about how hard it is now to send books to the EU. Some publishers that got a lot of their business by sending books to the EU now can no longer do that. The increase in the cost of getting paper, which is not only about Brexit, but partly attributable, I think. So it's actually more expensive to make a book now. The audience of where you can send it to is very limited. I think it's going to have. I do think it's going to have an effect on small publishing. I think it's going to probably put publishers out of business. And it's horrible to think that, but unfortunately, you know, I think this was always a strong possibility of Brexit, that it was going to have an effect on the cultural sector, because it makes it harder to exchange goods, harder to exchange ideas, and harder to get funding. Yeah, so it's disappointing. I think this isn't really necessarily about Brexit, but just about the cost of living generally, which I think is possibly partly attributable to Brexit. The lack of that we don't have as many workers in this country now, that it's harder to get goods in and out, and that affects prices. I think that is going to have an effect on individual artists and writers. It's certainly having an effect on me. As I said, I've always worked part-time to support my work, with the cost of living being what it is, and gas and electricity prices. It's highly likely that I'll need to take on more hours at work, at a day job, because the cost of everything is going up. And I can see a point coming where I can no longer get by on the kind of frugal lifestyle that I've already lived, that I've always lived, just because the cost of everything is going up and becoming so much more expensive.
Well, that's part of the thing. I think, when you kind of live less, you have less as well. So when things start going, yours goes quicker.
Yeah.
If you're constantly like consuming and getting assets and stuff, there's always something to sell, when things are getting desperate of like, you've got that much more fat to kind of live off.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you live in lean, then it's,
you're sort of on narrower margins, aren't you? But I think, people do it in different ways. As I said, some writers write after work or on weekends and they have a full-time job. I don't know how this will affect them, but people who do it the way I do it, where you have a day job, you work part-time, and then you create your art or you do your writing on your days off, it's definitely going to have an effect on us because, possibly I'll need to take on more hours at work and then I won't be able to write as much. That's the effect.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see what happens with the gig economy as well, because obviously like a lot of these, like we're seeing with the like Facebook and Twitter, just like now the price of money's gone up. They're just like, oh, everything's open, the price of money's gone up, we can't afford anything now, we've had to fire everybody. Because they're running on these fake margins where they just roll over because they could just borrow money at like virtually nothing. Now that reality, to some extent, is returned, that's going to become difficult. And that affects, like you say, that affects us as well because, there's less money around, so people are less willing to spend. And
well, let's be honest, there's less money for some people. Some people are, there's an inequality in society, which I think has just become more and more clear in the pandemic. Some people are doing great. If you already own a lot of things, or you
are friends with
own
any
shares.
government ministers.
Well, you may say that, but if you're already rich or you're connected to the right people, you might be doing great in this economy. But for most people, times are going to be a struggle, aren't they?
Well, it's a weird perception because you talk to some people, like I know some people with small businesses who, maybe it's not the case now, but like definitely sort of, I'd say from about March to about September, it were largely like, it's going great, I've never been busier, sort of thing. Like people coming back out of lockdown.
Yeah.
But then we had, that first interest rate rise, which was like, this all caused a recession. So then, of course, they did another one.
Well, I really, really hope that local businesses and locally owned businesses will continue to do well, because that would be a great thing. We need a strong local economy. I think that's one of the things that we really need in terms of, combating climate change. Strong local economies are key and really, really important. So I hope that local businesses do continue to do well, because that's what we need more of, really.
Yeah, and keeping the money in the city rather than it going out.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you could change any three things about your work, this will be the last question actually. If you could change any three things about your work, what would they be? And if you can sort of maybe for both jobs on this one.
Okay. Yeah. So if I could change anything about my work as an author.
Three things.
Any three things.
Yeah.
For both.
You don't have to use all three, but you can.
Okay. So for my work as an author, I think the thing that I would change is that it would be more well paid. That would be the first thing. Yeah. As many authors do, I kind of struggle to make a good living from my work as a writer. I'm not expecting to earn a ton of money, but a bit more money would be nice. I wouldn't say no. If I could change another thing about my work as an author, it would be that it doesn't take so much time. I find that if I want to write something that I'm really happy with, a short story or a novel, it takes ages because I'm such, I'm always rewriting things. If I could write quicker, I would love to be able to do that. But I think I don't see that changing. That's just the way that I am.
Yeah.
In terms of my day job working in the third sector, the one thing I would really love to see is that the third sector as a whole would be more sustainably funded and better funded, so that people don't slip through the net. People are getting the help that they need when they need it quickly, and people have the opportunity to do good things in their local communities. Things like free spaces to meet. That, as we've talked about, that would be a great thing. The third sector is, it can be a precarious place to work. Organisations and projects are always looking for funding to continue their work. I would love to see the third sector be on a more sustainable footing because it provides so many important local services and local opportunities for people. But I think in another slightly odd way, I would like for the third sector to not have to exist.
Yeah.
Because things like the food pantry where I used to work, where we were offering people affordable groceries because they couldn't get by, that, something had happened with their universal credit and it had been stopped, or they'd not been paid for their hours at work.
Yeah.
For me, in a country as rich as Britain, those things shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
People should be able to feed themselves and feed their children and not have to worry about what's coming next. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a weird answer that I want the third sector to be more sustainable, but I also want some of it to not have to exist.
Yeah. Yeah. You want it to be kind of more effective and sustainable so that it can be there and then ultimately eliminate itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like in when I worked at the TUC, it was kind of like, oh, we're trying to do all of this and we're trying to make workplaces better and stuff. It's like, but ultimately our goal should be to get rid of ourselves, because we want to get to the point where work is good enough and people have enough say that they can, that they feel safe and they're secure in their job and they get their rights. Like, would be the ideal. That's what we want to get to. But because you're an institution, you always have to think, no, we must live forever. Because the institution must reproduce itself.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? Funny thing with institutions. I suppose in terms of the Climate Action Leeds projects that I'm working on, what would I like to see? Well, it's quite big, and it's not just about my work, the work or my role within it. I would love to see big wholesale societal change, and it's not just about the workers within the project working to bring that about, which everyone is doing really well, I think. But for everybody as a city and as a country and every member of society to think about what changes do we need to bring about, how do we need to change the way we live our lives to live in a more sustainable zero carbon way. So that's, again, in a way about making the job obsolete, because I want these huge societal changes to come about so that projects like Climate Action Leeds don't need to exist, because we'll already be doing it.
I'm going to throw it over to you to give you a chance to talk about anything you might want to talk about that we've not covered yet, or that I might have distracted you from with one of my rants.
Oh, sorry. Knocking my keyboard over. Well, one of the things I said to you in an email was about some of my favourite books that are about work. Authors do find different ways to make a living as an author. And one of the authors that I really like that writes about work a lot is Magnus Mills. And his books are a bit weird. And he was a bus driver before he became an author. And even after he was an author, he went back to being a bus driver again. And I think being a bus driver is probably a really good job if you're a writer, because if you're driving the same route every day, you have a lot of time to think. You can almost do it automatically. You can come up with a lot of good ideas and almost write in your head. But you're also getting to see things and meet people. So I think it's really good. One of his books is The Scheme for Full Employment. This is a novel about a scheme where everybody is universally employed. It's about it's a project called where everyone drives the Univan. So there's this group of men, and they go to the depot every day. they pick up their univan, they fill it with univan parts, and then they drive it to another depot so that the univans at that depot can be fixed.
Mm.
And they have to go to the depots in a certain order, do them at certain times. They can't miss any out.
Mm.
And in this way, everyone has sustainable employment. And it's called The Scheme. And it's just such a good and funny and slightly weird book. I just wanted to read the first page of it because it's really interesting. Of course, if this had been any other country, the scheme would still be going today. In any other country, it would have been regarded as a national treasure, with the entire workforce striving to maintain the high standards and principles on which it was established. As a matter of fact, many of our continental neighbours adopted versions of the scheme for their own use, and in each case they achieved unbounded success. Yet there's no question whose idea it was in the first place. It was ours. We thought it up. The scheme for full employment was the envy of the world, the greatest undertaking ever conceived by men and women. It solved at a stroke the problem that had beset humankind for generations. Participants had only to put the wheels in motion, and they could look forward to a bright, sunlit upland where idleness and uncertainty would be banished forever. Planned to the finest detail by people of vision, the scheme was watertight and could not possibly go wrong. Except in this country. In this country, we managed to destroy it. We destroyed the last thing that could save us from obscurity and ruin, and we did it with our own hands too, not at the behest of some errant leader whom we could obey and then blame later. No, we can't lay the guilt on anyone but ourselves. The scheme was created for us, and it was we who finally brought it down. That's kind of the opposite of universal basic income. Let me see if I can find... I want to read a bit of this book, this David Graeber book as well, if I can find it.
It is a cracking book.
I love it.
Mm.
Were you going to ask me something about that?
No. But, well, have you read Debt? Have you read it?
No, it's on my list. I need
That's
to
really good.
order it at the library. It's really expensive, though, if you buy it. So I'm going to... No, that's not it. Notes and highlights. Here we are. So this is what I was talking about in terms of jobs that are socially useful. This is in the introduction of Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. Yet it is the peculiar genius of our society that its rulers have figured out a way to ensure that rage is directed precisely against those who actually get to do the meaningful work. For instance, in our society, there seems to be a general rule that the more obviously one's work benefits other people, the less one is likely to be paid for it. Again, an objective measure is hard to find, but one easy way to get a sense is to ask, what would happen were this entire class of people to simply disappear? Say what you like about nurses, garbage collectors, or mechanics. It's obvious that were they to vanish in a puff of smoke, the results would be immediate and catastrophic. A world without teachers or dock workers would soon be in trouble, and even one without science fiction writers or ska musicians would clearly be a lesser place. It's not entirely clear how humanity would suffer were all private equity CEOs, lobbyists, PR researchers, actuaries, telemarketers, bailiffs, or legal consultants to similarly vanish. Many suspect it might improve markedly. Yet apart from a handful of well-touted exceptions, doctors, the rule holds surprisingly well. It's a really good quote. I highlighted that when I read it because I think what became really clear during the pandemic is that there are essential jobs. Care work, nurses, people who drive buses, who fill the shelves in supermarkets, who...
people who bring you food from the other side of the world.
Yeah, people who bring you food. These are essential jobs. Yeah.
I thought you were going to go for another quote.
I'm just looking at this other one here. Yeah, it is. It's even clearer in the United States, where Republicans have had remarkable success mobilising resentment against school teachers and auto workers, and not significantly against school administrators or auto industry executives who actually cause the problems, for their supposedly bloated wages and benefits. It's as if they're being told, but you get to teach children or make cars. You get to have real jobs. And on top of that, you have the nerve to also expect middle-class pensions and healthcare. Slightly different in the UK because you get your healthcare included, but yeah.
You used to.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't have a health service anymore. My doctor just messages me saying, don't come.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to be fairly healthy and to not need to use the health service very much. But one of the really scary things about the pandemic, I remember being really scared by this. We were both sitting at home watching the news about what was coming. And while we were watching it, getting a text from our local GP surgery that basically said, do not come to the doctors. Even if you're ill, just don't come to the doctor. And essentially, it seemed like it was saying the doctor's surgery is closed. You can't come, even if you're really... That was frightening. To think, oh, well, if we get ill, what are we going to do? If it's not COVID and we want to go and see a doctor, we can't go now. We've been told we're not allowed.
Well, we're going to find out in a couple of years.
Yeah. I will say, though, that during the really horrible episode that I had when I worked at an awful place and had serious problems with my mental health that were caused by work, my GP was absolutely terrific and gave me a lot of support, and I needed to be signed off for a period, and they did that. So I can't really fault them for that. So in my experience, it was there when I needed it.
Yeah, but I mean, but that's not their fault.
Yeah.
It's not that, like if a service isn't there, that's because of funding issues. It's a capital issue. It's not it's not even a staffing issue. It's like you haven't got enough people working on this. You haven't invested in it properly. This is not a service that can function properly at this level. But then that's the most obvious one. I think people forget about, cuts were across the board. It was over a decade of cuts, which never finished. And that, so courts, Justice Department, prison, all of them are failing. And all of them have got backlogs, and all of them are and we'll see those things coming through as well more visibly soon.
Yeah. And this I didn't mention this earlier, but this is one of the things that has been very distressing about working in education, public sector and the third sector over the past 15 or so years, is that I've been through multiple restructures in different places where I've worked. I think I've been through a restructure about once every 3 or 4 years. It's horrendous to go through. It's not a unique experience. I think many people will have been through them. In most of the restructures, I was lucky enough to keep my job, but you can't. What happens is people lose their job, or there's a recruitment freeze, people leave and are not replaced. If you keep your job in a restructure, it's hard to celebrate that because that means that someone else has lost their job.
And plus it means you're doing more for less as well.
Absolutely.
Likely.
There's still the same amount of work to do, but there's not as many of you to do it.
Yeah.
So I've been in a situation where people were made redundant or left because the whole process is so horrible, and people who leave were not replaced. And I'm doing the job of 3 people here. I'm doing my job, I'm doing my redundant colleague's job, and I'm doing a bit of my ex-manager's job as well. Yeah, it's and there's been a lot of that, I think, in the public sector, the health service, local councils, the third sector over the past few years.
Okay, so where can people find you for, and if they want to buy the books, if they want to follow you, where can people find you?
Well, I still have a Twitter account, but it's unlikely that I'm going to be active on it. So you can go to my website, which is sjbradleybooks.com. On Mastodon, I'm at sjbradley@mstdn.social. If you go on to Instagram, I'm at Bradley Books on Twitter and Instagram, and my Mastodon handle is on both. Yeah, that just about covers it. I've got a mailing list as well, but I never use it, so don't sign up to that.
All the email marketers are like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
This is your number one marketing tool. Get people's names and email.
If anyone feels generous and wants to do a bit of pro bono marketing work and tell me how to use my mailing list, please get in touch.
Okay, so anything else you want to add before I wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I think we've had quite a good wide-ranging chat, haven't we?
Yeah, I feel a bit bad. I feel like I kind of ate into your time, so I hope I wasn't ranting too much.
No, I'm sure it'll all come out in the wash, I think, when you edit it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to thank you on the recording for this one. So thank you very much for doing this, and it's been a pleasure to speak to you. And thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me on. What do I want to tell people? Support independent bookshops. Support the many good local independent presses in the north of England. Use your library. It's great and it's free. And there's an app where you can reserve books for nothing.
And read Leeds, like all these Leeds authors. You've no excuse.
We're all here. We all need the money. And
we don't need these foreign stories with good Leeds books.
No, don't say that. That's a terrible thing to say.
I meant not there, London, rather than...
oh yeah, we don't need more London stories. Definitely not. But yeah, and also people aren't always aware, but we get money every time you check our book out of a library. So don't feel bad for checking books out of the library instead of buying them. We still get paid for that.
Thank you again to SJ for being my guest. Thanks again to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. And of course, most of all, thank you to you, my dear listener. Hope you like that episode and hope you like the next one too. You can follow this show on Twitter at Working Hours 3 and on Instagram at Working Hours Pod Leeds. Use the hashtag Working Hours Pod Leeds to stay up to date on when new episodes are being released, to DM me with your questions, or most importantly, to get in touch if you'd like to be my guest on this show. Please do chuck in anything you can to help the show grow. Go to ko-fi.com/working hours and join me there for £1 a month, or you can make a one-off donation of whatever amount. You can also go to patreon.com/working hours pod to support Working Hours, again from as little as £1 a month. Why not be super awesome and join both? Do something new and something different. Remember to like, share, follow and subscribe to Working Hours. That's me. Cheers ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Please like Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/Western_Studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Leeds, are you considering taking the plunge into podcasts or audio content? Then think Western Studios for support, advice and guidance on getting it made. At Western Studios, you work with a real-life learner who is actually in Leeds. Not a piece of software, not a course of articles or a series of live chats and video courses, but me, a person in physical place-based reality. If you want to work with me to make your podcast or any digital audio content in Leeds, whether it's for your own cause, your publicity campaigns, to promote your products, increase your sales, or just to create your own passion projects, then get in touch with me, Western Studios, now. Don't wade through vapid articles and videos and podcasts about how to make podcasts by disembodied virtual people on the web. Get on with making your podcast now, and then when it gets hard and expensive and it all goes wrong, which it will, then call Western Studios to make your podcast with you or even for you. Western Studios will take on your podcast's boring, time-consuming and painful admin, recording, editing, transcription, whatever. Tell me about your podcasting pain points and I can make it all better for you. I feel your pain. For a charge, I will share it. Remember, podcast work is work. Leeds businesses, Leeds campaigns, Leeds brands. Got an inkling that you'd like a podcast but don't know where to start? Contact Western Studios at makemypodcast@western-studios.com and we'll start making your podcast straight away. The first hour of arranged consultation and pre-production time is free. £25 an hour after that for editing, recording, production. I can also arrange hefty discounts for the right project. So tell me your idea and your budget and I'll tell you what I can do for you. What do you have to lose? Time. That's what. Time is running out. The best time to make a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. Writers in Yorkshire, what are you doing with your lives? Hopefully you're writing. Well, I know there are listeners out there who want to hear great original writing performed as audio content that is about and for and has been made in Leeds. How do I know this? Because I'm one of them loiners what wants it. Help me make your old screenplays, unpublished novels, unperformed plays, stories, poems, and performances, whatever you got, baby, and make it as podcast content. Is your work arty, salacious, pulpy, strange? Good. Is it unfinished? Good. I can help you with that too. I can work with you to find actors, musicians, and voiceover artists and quickly realise your projects. I get practice making the shows and you get a finished, performed and published version of your writing. Save yourself the hassle and the headache of making your podcasts on your own by working with me instead.